Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring Abraham what he has spoken to him. And the Lord said, because of the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I will know. So we read that there are three men, and they rise, and they're going to look toward Sodom. And Abraham is sending them on their way. And these three men, we discussed about last Wednesday, they appear in the beginning of Genesis chapter 18. And it's when Abraham is in front of his tent, he's just hanging out at the hottest part of the day, and he sees three men approaching. So Abraham gets up and he runs to them. And we read how he prepares them a meal. And as the four of them are eating, one of the men says, hey, Abraham, I want to say something to you. And he begins to prophesy that Abraham and Sarah will have a child by this time next year. And again, if you remember, Sarah has been barren. They've had no children. And so once Abraham hears this, he's kind of shocked. And Sarah's, she overhears this conversation with the four of them, the three men and Abraham. And she begins to laugh. She's like, okay. And one of the men asks, why did Sarah laugh? She's like, I wasn't laughing, but you were laughing. And so I didn't discuss a lot about this, the past teaching. But who are these men, these three men? Well, we read in chapter 2, or Genesis chapter 18, 2 and 3, that Abraham recognizes something divine, at least about one of them. And he actually calls him Lord. That's the Hebrew word Adonai, title used for God, which shows Abraham, he discerned that these aren't just any ordinary men. And then the other two men are later identified, we'll read later on in chapter 19, as angels. So we have God, whether that's a theophany, God the Father, or a Christophany, Jesus Christ incarnate before he came. Either way, it's God and these two angels. And they go, and the Lord looks over the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then he begins to reiterate, Abraham, that I have a special plan for you. And I'm going to make you into a great and a mighty nation. And he mentions how many nations would be blessed through Abraham. And how many nations are blessed through Abraham is through Jesus Christ. We sing the song, Father Abraham had many sons and many daughters as well. It's because Jesus Christ came and we've been adopted into the family of the Lord. And the Lord, again, he reiterates his call, and he calls Abraham and his descendants, walk worthy, walk in justice, walk in righteousness. And then the Lord says, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, as well as their sin. The wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah has risen to its full measure. And now the time has come for the cup of the Lord's wrath to be poured out upon Sodom and Gomorrah. God's patience has run out. We often think, the Lord, we can come to the Lord anytime. The Lord will always forgive. That is not biblical. There will come a time when the patience of the Lord runs out. And God's patience in this case has run its course, and now his justice is going to speak. So when it says Sodom and Gomorrah, it's crying out. All right, who's specifically crying out of these cities? Some suggest Lot, because Lot, we'll read later on, he's in the city, so maybe Lot's just burdened for the sin that's going on in the city, and so he's crying out. I don't think that's the case, but if you believe that, that's okay. Others believe these could be angelic hosts. So we read, especially in Daniel, how there are angels over certain areas and regions. So maybe the angels who are over Sodom and Gomorrah are crying out to the Lord to do something. That could be. I like that a little better. But I think the most likely understanding of this phrase is that sin itself is crying out. Sin itself is crying out for the Lord's justice. And we read about this in Genesis chapter 4, verse 10. Cain kills his younger brother Abel, murders him in cold blood, the first murder. And the Lord comes to Cain and says, listen, verse 10, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. You guys know that sin has a voice? Sin has a voice before God and cries out for a divine response. All right, Lord, what are you going to do about this injustice? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can expound upon this very greatly. But God hears every cry of sin, every cry of injustice or hatred or racism or murder or gossip. The Lord hears all of it. None of it escapes the Lord's ears. He knows, and again, as I mentioned, the Lord's mercy is long, but it's not endless. The Lord's mercy is not endless. And there will come a day when grace will finally run out, and it's time for judgment will make way. And we read beforehand how Sodom and Gomorrah, they've been warned time and time again. They have seen the mercy of the Lord. They have seen a revelation from the Lord. In Genesis 14, we read about how these four kings, they ransack Sodom, and they destroy the city, and they take everything they own. But here comes Abraham to the rescue. He gets all their stuff, and Abraham gives the stuff back to Sodom. Again, they see a man walking with the Lord. They had witnessed Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God, a testimony of the Lord. They had the witness of Lot, which, however faint his light was. Yet, even after receiving warning and revelation, Sodom and Gomorrah continued an open rebellion. And we'll talk more about what sin they were committing. Sins. I just want to mention this too. God's judgment is never sudden. The Lord will not just, you did one bad sin, boom, there comes judgment. The Lord is long suffering. He suffers long with those. It doesn't come without warning, his judgment. His judgment is always preceded. It comes before mercy. The Lord is full of mercy. He's full of patience. He's full of opportunities for Sodom and Gomorrah to turn their face to him. But when sin continues rampant and it goes unchecked, and when mercy is continually rejected, the cry of sin reaches heaven, and judgment will follow. So the Lord decides, I'm going to go down to the city and I'm going to evaluate. So we go on to read in verse 22. Then the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord, Adonai. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge, capital J, of all the earth do right? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. Then Abraham answered and said, indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than 50 righteous. Would you destroy all the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there should be 40 found there. So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it if I find 30. And he said, indeed now, I've taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I'll speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. So Abraham and the men, they walk towards Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 men go to the cities. And Abraham stays behind with the Lord. And Abraham, I bet he has an inkling feeling that they're about to be judged. So Abraham says, hey, I got a request, Lord. Fire away. What if you find 50 righteous people? Are you going to destroy the whole city if there are 50 good, righteous people? The Lord says, all right, I won't destroy the city if I find 50. All right, Lord, what about 45? You can do 45. Oh, all right, 45 it is. Lord, one more thing. What about 40? But can we do 40? Then he goes to 30, 20. He says, Lord, Please don't be angry with me. What if you just find 10? Are you still going to destroy a whole city if you find 10 righteous people? The Lord says, I will relent from destroying the city. I bet Abraham knew his nephew was in this city. Chapter 19, verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Underline that. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them. He bowed himself with his face toward the ground, and he said, Here now, my lords, please turn in to your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, No, but we will spend the night in the open square. But he insisted strongly. So they turned in to him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So again, the Lord stays behind with Abraham. Abraham and Abraham and the Lord have this dialogue. And the two angels who were with the Lord go down into Sodom during the evening time. And as these angels are approaching the city, it says Lot was sitting at the gate and notices these two men. By the way, Lot being at the gate, the city gate was a place of, at this time, prominence and leadership. In ancient times, a gate wasn't just an entrance to the city, but the entrance of the gate was a courtroom, a meeting place, kind of like a civic center where all the important delegates would be. Respected leaders and elders would also be there too. We read in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1, Boaz, Ruth's boyfriend, went to the town gate and took a seat there to the town gate. Then we also read in Proverbs 31, verse 23. Her husband is well known at the city gates, where he sits with the other civic leaders. So think of like Parliament or the city council. So maybe Lot is just working on his whatever he's working on, his Excel spreadsheet, and he sees through the window of his little office. Oh, what are those two men? Let me go find them. And so he goes down the stairs, and he meets these two men, these two angels, and he introduces himself to them. And Lot, he's demonstrating a measure of hospitality, pardon me. And he invites them in, hey, come to my home. Come to my home. I'll prepare a feast. We'll wash your feet, and you can spend the night. Let's talk about Lot for a little bit. I'm going to take this teaching a little different. A lot of people focus on Sodom and Gomorrah, which that's a big part of it. I'm going to focus tonight on Lot. Let me remind you of Lot. You remember, the Lord called Abraham to an adventure. Abraham was in his parents' basement playing video games all day. And the Lord said, Abraham, I have more for you than just playing Xbox all day. So Abraham gets up from his father's house and he goes on an adventure. And the Lord told Abraham, leave all, even my Xbox, leave all and come follow me. And so he leaves a lot, but he takes Lot, his nephew. Hey, Lot, the Lord called me to an adventure. Do you want to come with? Again, disobeying the Lord. So he takes his nephew. And after a couple detours, they spend time in Haran, they spend time in Egypt. They finally come to the land of Canaan, the promised land. However, as they come, the herdsmen of Abraham and Lot, they begin to dispute and bicker with one another. Well, my sheep can't eat this because your sheep have already eaten this. And they begin to quarrel among themselves. And Abraham decides to take a step of faith, and he trusts in the Lord. And he offers Lot, hey, Lot, our men are fighting with one another. There's disputes. How about this? You can choose which land you want, and I'll choose the opposite of it. Genesis 13, verse 8. Finally, Abraham said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict to continue between us or our herdsmen. After all, we are close relatives. The whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want the land to the left, then I'll take the land on the right. If you prefer the land on the right, then I will go to the left. And so Lot says, all right. And he looks towards the east, which was close to Sodom. And he decided, that's the land I want. By the way, when you read, I've said this before, east in the Bible, it's never a good sign. Just have your alarm bells. Adam and Eve were kicked to the east side of the garden. Cain settled after he killed Abel to the land of the east. It's never a good sign. After they left Babel, they traveled east. It's never a good sign. So Lot looks towards the east. And he sees it's well-watered, it's fertile land. I'm going to establish my home. Genesis 13, 10 and 11. Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord or the beautiful land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle Abram. This decision will come with hardship. Again, we already read Lot was kidnapped, and now the Lord is about to judge the land he's living in. So Lot says, hey, angels, come in. I'll show you hospitality. And the angels say, no, we'll stay in the open square. And Lot's like, no, do you know which city you're in? It's like, no, we'll stay. No. You're coming in with me. And so the angels come into his home. Verse 4. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. And they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind him, and said, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. Then they said, this one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But the men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. So before going to bed, they have this huge feast, having kebabs and yada yada. They wash their feet. They're about to go to bed. They're in their pajamas. And then they hear bustling and rustling outside. And it's the men of the city. And they surround Lot's home and they ask, or more so demand Lot, bring the 2 men, verse 5, so that we may know them carnally. By the way, it emphasizes the word men twice. To point, I'll lay down the curtain a little bit, to their homosexual nature. Know them carnally, maybe your translation says, have relations with them. This is a euphemism. These men they're not coming to Lot's house and saying, hey, I just want to meet you. Welcome to the city. Hey, what's your Fortnite handle? No, that's not what's going to happen. What these young men, and old men, by the way, so fathers and sons, want to do with these angels is essentially gang rape them. From the last phrase translated, from every quarter, your Bible says, if you have the New King James Version, is literally every last man. So all the men of the city, essentially, come to Lot's home. And Lot implores with them. So, hey, these are my guests. Hey, please don't cause harm to them. And Lot comes up with the brilliant idea. Hey, men, I have 2 daughters. Yeah, they've never known a man. They've never been married. How about I give you them, but you don't touch the 2 men? Yeah, it gets crazy. In verse 7, again, Lot says, please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. And yet here Lot is suggesting a cruel and wicked thing. Don't take these 2 men. Take my 2 young daughters. Lot's spiritual state is so warped right now. And he's compromising one sin for another in order to please the men. Jesus' brother writes in chapter 4, verse 4, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? Say it again. If you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. By the way, some people say the reason why the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was because of the lack of hospitality. That is not accurate. Let me read from Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49 and 50. Sodom's sins were pride, gluttony, and laziness, while the poor and needy suffered outside her door. She was proud and committed detestable sins. So I wiped her out, as you have seen. friendship with the world. Hey, I want to keep both sides happy, so how about I give you this and you don't do this? But emotions are running high this night, and Lot is denying these men what they want. And the men outside finally have had enough, and they tell Lot, you know what? We're going to abuse you worse than we were going to abuse the men. And so they go after Lot, and they're trying to break open the door. When a culture flaunts sin, that's bad enough. Yeah, they're applauding sin. That's bad. But when a culture specifically engages and uplifts sexual immorality, specifically homosexuality, it means that the Lord has given the society to a debased mind. What does a debased mind mean? Not knowing what's right and wrong, not knowing up from down. Romans 1, verse 26 and 27. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men. And as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. So these group of men, the city men, they're trying to get through the door, and the angels pull back Lot. And the angels strike the men with blindness so they can't find the door. In verse 12 through 22, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to read all of it. But then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So we read that in this section, verse 12 through 22, verses 12 through 22. The angels, they're urging Lot, hey, Lot, grab everything you have, grab your family specifically, and get out of the city immediately. But we read, and you can read it on your own time, morning comes. We often think like this happened all in one night. No, the sun is starting to shine. This happened that night before they went to bed, and now it's the early hours of the morning. So Lot's just kind of hesitating. He's just kind of lingering. Oh yeah, we got to get out. He's like, should I take this picture? Should I take this? And the angel's like, come on, we got to go. The Lord's going to judge this place. And finally the angel said, all right, we got to go. And it says they take Lot's hand. And they hurry him, his wife, and daughters out of the city. And the angels command Lot, flee to the mountains and don't look back. But Lot pleads, can we... The mountains are really far away. Can we just go to this other city in Zorah? And the angels say, all right, we'll grant your request. And so Lot and his family flee to another city. In verse 23, the sun had risen above the earth when Lot entered Zorah. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the city, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So when Lot enters the city, the Lord starts judgment. And fire and brimstone rain. Think of like napalm. Just completely decimates the city. However, we read that Lot's wife looks back, and instantly she becomes a pillar of salt. I think her backward glance is more than just a physical glance. But I think it represents an attachment to sin, unbelief, and longing for a life that God had already called her and her family out of. I think this illustrates the danger of emotional and spiritual compromise. Even in the moment of salvation, holding on to the past or resisting the Lord's command. I Again, the Lord has saved, as far as I'm aware, most of us in this room. The Lord has saved us from hell, from fire and brimstone, you could say. So the question is, why would we want to look back? When the Lord delivers you from sin, whether that's addiction or destructive relationship or past, whatever it may be, we're not called to glance back or focus of what we left behind, especially when people are telling their testimonies. People, we call them braggamonies. And this is man, I had Beamers and Maseratis and Bentleys. Man, I had women all over them. But the Lord saved. It's like, do you long for that life? No, we don't look back. And by the way, if you keep looking back, I'm not saying you're going to turn into a pillar of salt, but something destructive will happen in your life. But let's read, you thought it was bad enough. Let's read verse 30 through 38. Then Lot went out to Zorah and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zorah. And he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Now the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come in to us, as the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night. And the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. And you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn, a son called his name Moab. He was the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger she bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammon. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So Lot leaves the city of Zorah, and he goes to the mountains because he's afraid to live in the city. Now, as I was studying this, I was really perplexed. Why is he afraid to live in the city? When I was doing my research and studying, apparently Zorah, it was a small city. And it was pretty close to Sodom and Gomorrah. And so I was thinking, maybe it's just the influence. This is just another Sodom and Gomorrah. Maybe Lot just feared for his safety. The Lord's going to judge this place like he judged Sodom and Gomorrah. I got to get out of here. And so Lot takes his family, his 2 daughters with him in a cave, isolated from the rest of society. And the older daughter, she just devises a plan. Hey, sis, we got to preserve our lineage, our father's lineage. Yeah, I agree too. And they think they're the last survivors. And so they get their father drunk and they both sleep with him. By the way, the children that come from this incestuous relationship will be enemies of Israel, like the descendants of Ishmael. Lot's life ends in affliction, all because of compromise. Genesis 18, starting in verse 16 all the way to chapter 19, as we studied tonight, shows the spiritual decline of Lot and serves as a warning for you. Believers don't often just fall into sin. It's like, oh man, I just suddenly found myself here. No, they drift slowly, and slowly, step by step, through subtle compromises. People, specifically believers, they don't walk with the Lord all of their days of their life and then find themselves into sin like David and Bathsheba. It doesn't happen like that. Sin, and for those who are listening, especially quote-unquote big ones, it begins with small compromises, bit by bit. And eventually, you'll find yourself living in Sodom and Gomorrah. So, the question I want to ask is, how does being taken over by sin start? How am I taken over by sin? Where did it start from? If you're taking notes, there's 4, principles I came up with. They all start with A, so it makes it easy for you to memorize. The path towards destruction starts with attraction. Attraction. Genesis 13, verse 10. Lot lifted his eyes and saw the well-watered plains of Jordan. It looked good. It was fertile. It was like Egypt, full of opportunity. But he didn't realize that was leading him closer to Sodom. Satan rarely starts off with obvious sins. I said this last Sunday. Satan doesn't come up to you in the middle of the day and says, hey kid, want marijuana? That's not, Satan's way smarter than that. He knows you're going to say no. That doesn't even tempt me one bit. But he starts with something attractive. Something that catches your eye and stirs within your heart. And I think especially to men, because us men, we're way more visual. So the evil one will use visual effects to get us. A pretty woman walks by. In that moment, men, you have a choice to respect yourself and guard your heart, or take the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth look and gawk at her. But each additional glance is compromise that slowly erodes the holiness and dulls your sensitivity to sin. The lust of the eyes, you could say, Satan's oldest and most effective strategy. Even the garden, when she saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eyes. David, 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2, he saw a woman bathing. Samson, Judges 14, verse 1, he saw the woman of Timnah and wanted her. And attraction itself is not a sin. But what you do with that attraction determines your direction. Are you going to go this way? Or are you going to go that way? What you set your eyes on will eventually be the course of your heart. So attraction leads to the road of destruction. But what happens after attraction? Association. After attraction comes association. Instead of fleeing like Joseph from Potiphar's wife, fleeing from what's tempting, many believers start to linger, convincing themselves, I'm not participating, I'm just there. I'm here, but I'm not there. And I think this is another subcategory. I really wanted to incorporate this, but doesn't really fit with the A's. But I think fantasizing too. When the imagination builds a home where sin can grow, nobody can see what's up in here besides the Lord. So you begin to make this house, fantasize. Before David acted with Bathsheba, the sin was already conceived in his heart. Fantasizing. For example, you'll never ever marry that person. But you start replaying, but what if? What would we do? You might not be able to afford the thing you can buy, but you keep on scrolling, and not just, Lord, I would love this one day, but I just want this, I want this. You keep scrolling, you keep dreaming, you keep desiring. Fantasy is a foothold before the fall. Matthew 5, verse 28. Jesus says, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery within his heart. By the way, Jesus didn't come to abolish the law. He came to intensify the law. Jesus, that's intense. Jesus says, don't even intensify your speech. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is where the enemy gains momentum and tightens his grip. But going back to association. You might go to the bar, but you tell yourself, I'm not drinking. You might hang out with friends who gossip, but I'm not participating in the gossip. But I'm just there. The problem is not what you just do. It's what you choose to stay around. Because eventually, proximity dulls conviction. We see Lot pitched his tent towards Sodom. Let me just camp out right here. I'm not in Sodom, but I'm next to it. Maybe he thought, I won't live like those animals. Gosh, I'll just live near them. But the closer he got, the more comfortable he became. And comfort is the first step towards compromise. And again, the Lord calls us to be the light in the dark places. But there's a difference between going into darkness to make a difference and living in darkness to blend in. Association with sin always, it sets a stage for disaster. The Lord calls us to be holy. What does holy mean? To be set apart, to be different. I'm setting you apart for my work. Not to, I've saved you, but I still want you to be in the world. No, we're called to pursue holiness. And if we're pitching our tent outside Sodom, buckle up. Again, Jesus is our perfect example. Yes, Jesus did spend time with the tax collectors and the murderers and the drunkards and the hookers of the day. They even accused Jesus of being a drunkard because he spent so much time with them. But his purpose was to redeem, not to relate for acceptance. The world accused him of being a friend of sinners, but he never compromised his holiness to win their approval, to be labeled as tolerant. You're just so tolerant. We're not called to be tolerant as Christians, by the way. We're called to be holy. Assimilation, number 3. Attraction, association, now assimilation. When you stop being influenced by the Lord and start being influenced by the world. Start being one with the world. What once grieved you, now no longer grieves you. Back in the day, but who cares? Now that conviction is just normal. The longer a tea bag sits in water, over time the water is not going to be water anymore. It's going to be tea. In the same way, the longer you stay immersed in sinful environments, the more you stay immersed in sinful relationships, the more you start to take on the flavor, the values, the mindsets. Lot didn't just live near Sodom. He became a part of it. Again, Genesis 19, he's sitting at the gate. He's a part of the council member, a position of leadership. He wasn't just a resident. What began as a casual connection turned into full participation. That's what sin does. It attracts, it associates, and it assimilates. Guys, and I think this is extremely prevalent for y'all's age. The people you surround yourself with will shape your speech and will shape your standards and will shape your spirit. Who you hang out with tells a lot about you and where you are headed. If you surround yourself with godly people and a godly influence, man, the Lord's going to work wonders in your life. But if you surround yourself with girls who love to gossip and, I just love drama. Hey, did you hear about so-and-so? If you surround yourself with guys who can't take anything seriously but just are joking and joking and joking, you start to act like them. You start to dress like them. You start to think like them. You start to talk like them. Have your parents, after spending time with a certain group of friends and then you come home and then you start talking like them and your mom's like, where did you hear that from? That's assimilation. It's slow. It's subtle. Sin never stays static. Sin doesn't just stop. It wants you all. I have a teaching in my head. Sin is a good mathematician. The more you keep looking, the more likely you'll start longing. The more you linger, the more you'll begin to live out, and then you'll start to justify it. Again, no one just falls into sin overnight. Sunday you're worshiping the Lord, you've been following him all the rest of your day or for your whole life, and then on Friday you're like, I'm just gonna have a one-night stand. That's not how it starts. I don't know what happened to my marriage, it just happened. No, your marriage had problems in the beginning. It didn't just happen like that. It's a gradual blending when you can no longer tell the difference between holiness and worldliness. So, guys, guard your hearts. Stay distinct, stay holy, stay close to the Lord. And lastly, affliction. Affliction. Sin always brings death. The wages of sin is death. Sin always brings, I could say, suffering. What begins as something attractive, it's like mermaids. It's like, oh, they're so beautiful. And then they drag you to the depths and kill you. That's what sin is. Starts something as attractive, but ends in agonizing suffering. Lot's story shows us that compromise doesn't just cost you spiritually. It costs you everything. He lost his home, he lost his possessions, he lost his reputation, and he lost his wife. And basically, he lost his daughters. Sin always promises pleasure, but it will always bring pain. Sin always takes you further than you want to go. I'll just stop here, and then, I'll have another drink, and then another drink. And then you drive home, and then you kill someone. That's what sin does. Keeps you longer than what you want to stay. However, God's mercy did pull Lot out, literally by the hand, as the angels. But still the Lord's mercy didn't erase the consequences that Lot had to go through. Lot's wife looked back and she turned to a pillar of salt just like that. His daughters carried out corruption, leading to a generational sin. Sometimes the Lord lets us taste bitterness and affliction so we won't crave it again. Affliction can be redemptive. Yeah, redemptive. If it drives you back to the Lord. Let me read Psalm 1. I'm going to read all of it. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the paths of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates on it day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like chaff, which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Lot looked towards Sodom. He set his tent next to Sodom. He lived in Sodom, and he became a leader in Sodom. He left his life, and he lost everything. That's the title of the message. That's the slow drift to destruction. Let me walk. Let me stand. Let me assimilate. Starts with open rebellion. But here's the thing. There is hope. God, again, still pulled Lot out. Even when Lot lingered. That's mercy. And that's what the Lord still does today. So I want to encourage you, maybe exhort you. If you have found yourself drifting, if you have found yourself attracted to the world and associating and compromising and assimilating into sin, don't stay there. The same God who pulled Lot out can pull you out too. Amen?